In 1983, Gene Simmons first met Shannon Tweed at the Playboy Mansion. It would take him almost 3 decades before they finally got married in 2011, but the wedding was not the romantic fairytale many people imagined. It was more about protecting his public image and hiding a scandal that was threatening to destroy everything he had built. Later, behind-the-scenes footage from their family reality show revealed conversations that had never been meant for the public. His son got caught up in a plagiarism scandal, and later legal documents surfaced that involved allegations made by female employees. For a man who once bragged about sleeping with nearly 5,000 women, the consequences he faced were no longer just about his wild reputation but about something much deeper and damaging. But before he was Gene Simmons, the world-famous rock star, he was just a boy named Chaim Witz, born on August 25, 1949, in Haifa, Israel. His early life was shaped by pain and survival. His mother, Flora Klein, was born in Hungary in 1925 and survived the unimaginable horrors of the Holocaust. At just 14 years old, she had been forced into labor by Nazi soldiers, picking potatoes in the fields while dressed in marked clothing that separated her from everyone else. She moved between camps, living in constant fear, watching her family disappear one by one. That trauma followed her for the rest of her life, even after the war. Gene's father, Yiel Witz, had also escaped from Hungary, and after marrying Flora in 1946, the couple moved to Israel the following year, just before the new state was established. Their lives were filled with struggle, and Gene was born into a world still scarred by war. By the time he was 6 years old, things got even harder. His parents' marriage fell apart, mostly due to poverty. His father stayed behind in Israel, remarried, and started a new family, while his mother raised him alone in Mount Carmel. Life was not easy. Flora worked in factories, sewing buttons just to keep food on the table, and there were many nights when all they had for dinner was bread and milk. Gene, still a little boy, tried to help however he could. He picked fruit with a friend and sold it by the roadside. He made his own winter coat out of an old army blanket. He understood hardship in a way most children never did. He would often cry himself to sleep in an empty house, waiting for his mother to come home after long shifts at work. At school, he didn't fit in either. Other children bullied him for being different, and some of the prejudice that had followed his mother from Europe now landed on him in Israel. But something else gave him hope: comic books. Even though he couldn't read English yet, he would stare at American superhero comics like Spider-Man and Superman, and he tried to teach himself the language just so he could understand them. By the age of 7, he already spoke Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish, and slowly he began picking up English as well. Those heroes gave him strength and a sense of escape from the struggles around him. His mother rarely spoke about what she had endured during the Holocaust, but Gene could see it in her silence, in the way she sometimes cried without explanation, and in her fierce protectiveness over him. That silence shaped him. It gave him a deep determination never to appear weak and never to let anyone see him break. In 1957, Flora made a life-changing decision. With almost nothing to her name, she left Israel with her 8-year-old son and moved to Queens, New York. They arrived in America with no money, no family waiting, and no English to help them navigate the new world. His father stayed behind, and Gene never saw him again. In the United States, Gene became Eugene Klein, trying to adapt to his new surroundings. Flush toilets and TV dinners amazed him, but the adjustment was difficult. Flora worked endless hours in factories, sometimes up to 15 hours a day, and Gene spent a lot of time being raised by babysitters. At first, he attended a Jewish school, but he didn't feel like he belonged there. Later, he switched to public school, eventually graduating from Newtown High School in 1967. His accent made him stand out, and other kids teased him for it, but instead of letting it defeat him, he used it as fuel to work harder. He started selling cactuses door to door, just as he had once sold fruit in Israel. Every rejection only made him push further. He learned English faster by watching TV and reading more comics. In 1959, at only 9 years old, he changed his name again, this time to Gene Klein, inspired by cowboy actors like Gene Autry. He wanted to be fully American now. He fell in love with television, especially The Ed Sullivan Show, and when he saw the Beatles perform on February 9, 1964, something inside him changed forever. He wanted that life. He wanted to be on stage, to be adored, to turn his pain and emptiness into power and recognition. Through his teenage years, Gene worked a series of small jobs. He worked in butcher shops, delis, and even made just over $1 an hour at one point. But he was determined to save every penny. He avoided alcohol, even when others around him drank at parties. He wanted to stay sharp, and he realized that clarity gave him an advantage when it came to impressing girls. He also began learning the guitar, inspired by the Beatles, and practiced constantly. He played in small bands, chasing the dream that had been sparked in him. After high school, Gene studied education at Sullivan County Community College, graduating with an associate degree in 1970. He even worked as a sixth-grade teacher in Spanish Harlem, earning just $75 a week. But teaching wasn't his true calling. Music was. He formed a band with Paul Stanley in 1970 called Rainbow, which soon became Wicked Lester. They played gigs at night while working other jobs during the day. Gene also worked at a fashion magazine and did translation jobs thanks to the many languages he had learned as a child. But his heart was always in music. Wicked Lester recorded an album in 1972, but the record label hated it and refused to release it. The rejection was devastating, but instead of giving up, Gene and Paul decided to start over. By 1973, they had formed a new band with drummer Peter Criss and guitarist Ace Frehley. They called it Kiss. From the start, they wanted Kiss to be different. This wasn't going to be just another rock band. They wanted it to be theatrical, explosive, and unforgettable. Gene created his famous demon persona, inspired by horror movies and comic books, complete with bat wings painted around his eyes. He breathed fire and spat blood on stage, creating a terrifying and thrilling character that set the band apart. Peter became the Catman, Ace the Spaceman, and Paul the Starchild. Together, they created something the world had never seen before. At first, their shows were small, sometimes with only a handful of people in the audience. But word began to spread about the wild performances, the makeup, and the energy. Slowly, their reputation grew. In 1973, music manager Bill O'Coin discovered them and promised he would get them a record deal within 2 weeks, and he did. Kiss signed with Casablanca Records, and in 1974, they released their first album. It didn't sell well at first, but their relentless touring kept the band alive. Gene threw himself into building the Kiss brand, not just as a musician but as a businessman. He took countless Polaroid pictures of his sexual encounters, claiming that he had proof of every conquest, and bragged about sleeping with thousands of women. While he avoided drugs and alcohol, his sex addiction became part of his image. His wife Shannon would later discover the photos after their marriage and burn them publicly on their reality show, marking the end of that chapter in his life. Kiss's real breakthrough came in 1975 with the release of their live album Alive. It captured the raw power of their concerts, with screaming fans, explosive energy, and an unpolished edge that made listeners feel like they were there in the crowd. The album sold millions of copies and saved both the band and their struggling record label from collapse. Suddenly, Kiss wasn't just another band, they were legends in the making. By the mid-1970s, Kiss had become one of the most exciting live acts in the world. Their shows were filled with fire, blood, explosions, and elaborate stage effects. Gene flew across the stage, Ace's guitar shot rockets, and Peter's drums were surrounded by smoke. Their concerts became massive spectacles, unlike anything audiences had seen before. But with success came problems. By the late 1970s, tensions within the band were growing. The fame, the pressure, and Gene's own ego began creating cracks in their once solid foundation. Behind the fire and makeup, there were battles that threatened to tear everything apart. In the late 70s, Kiss was one of the biggest bands in the world, but their glory days were already beginning to fade. Some shows were cancelled or poorly attended, like the Pontiac Silverdome, which had to be scrapped because of low ticket sales, or the Los Angeles concerts that were scaled down to smaller venues. The cracks in the band's unity became obvious when Peter Criss, the drummer, spiraled deeper into drug abuse. His behavior grew erratic. Sometimes, right in the middle of a performance, he would stop drumming altogether just to lash out at his bandmates or the audience. Gene Simmons, never one to sugarcoat, called it pure self-destruction. By the time the band played its final show of the tour in Toledo on December 16, 1979, it was clear the original Kiss was falling apart. Fans could feel the difference too. Their sound was changing, with disco sneaking into their music. Instead of hardcore rock fans filling the seats, families started showing up. Gene still dreamed big and pushed forward, but the band was coming down fast. In 1978, things got even stranger. NBC aired a made-for-TV movie called Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park on October 28. It was produced by Hanna-Barbera, the same animation studio behind Scooby-Doo. The film portrayed Kiss as superheroes fighting an evil inventor inside a theme park. Gene improvised wild lines about world domination, which echoed his real-life obsession with turning Kiss into a worldwide brand. The problem was that the acting was terrible. Fans hated it, and even the band members themselves wanted to forget it ever happened. People who worked on the set were later banned from bringing it up. Still, the film gained a strange cult following, especially in Europe, where it was renamed Attack of the Phantoms. The whole thing made it obvious that Gene's ego wasn't just large, it was unstoppable. That same year, each member of Kiss released their own solo album on September 18, 1978. Gene's record outsold some of the group's official albums. It included bizarre covers like When You Wish Upon a Star and even featured guest appearances from Cher and Bob Seger. The songs dealt with themes like radioactivity and twisted fantasies, perfectly reflecting Gene's eccentric personality. Meanwhile, the band released Dynasty in May of 1979. The single I Was Made for Loving You became a huge hit, reaching number 11 on the Billboard charts. The album went platinum in 5 countries and sold over 1 million copies. But the disco flavor in the record alienated many rock fans. Ticket sales collapsed. Venues got smaller. The once mighty Kiss magic was starting to fade. Peter Criss ended up playing drums on only one track before leaving for good. The cracks had widened into full splits. In 1983, the band made a bold move that shocked everyone. On September 18, they appeared on MTV and removed their makeup. For the first time in 10 years, fans saw their real faces. At the same time, they released Lick It Up. The album went platinum, selling over 1 million copies. The music was rawer, heavier, and more aggressive. Fans returned, and Gene saw it as a rebirth of Kiss. Even though the makeup was gone, the business was booming. By then, Kiss had over 100 licensed products, everything from lunchboxes to action figures, pulling in millions in merchandise sales. In 1984, Gene Simmons tried his hand at acting in Hollywood. He played the villain Luther in Runaway, a sci-fi thriller directed by Michael Crichton. His character was a mad scientist who used killer robots to murder people, a role that borrowed heavily from his demon stage persona. Gene relished the chance to deliver dramatic lines, and his character eventually died by his own creations. While Gene was chasing movie roles, the band was also dealing with major changes. Peter Criss had already been fired in 1980 after his addiction made him impossible to work with. Gene compared firing him to a necessary amputation. Eric Carr replaced him as the new drummer, known by his Fox persona. Losing Peter was painful, but it gave the band a chance to start fresh. By 1989, Kiss released Hot in the Shade. The ballad Forever became a huge success, reaching number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. The album sold over 500,000 copies and gave them their biggest hit of the no-makeup years. But the softer, romantic sound confused some fans who wanted rebellious rock. Meanwhile, Gene's personal life was messy. He was constantly distracted by Hollywood projects and his endless affairs. He often missed recording sessions and rehearsals. The late 80s also gave Eric Carr a chance to shine, as he sang lead vocals on Little Caesar. Sadly, it would be his last contribution before his death in 1991. Gene's distractions nearly tore the band apart completely. In his 2001 autobiography Kiss and Makeup, Gene revealed the truth about his lifestyle. He claimed to have slept with more than 4,800 women. One of the most dramatic stories came from the late 70s, when he was dating Cher between 1979 and 1980. During that time, he fell for her best friend, Diana Ross. What began as a Christmas shopping trip turned into a full-blown love affair. Cher never forgave them, and the scandal exploded in People magazine. It became one of the most famous betrayals in rock history. Gene somehow managed to remain on friendly terms with both women, but the damage was permanent. Then, in 1996, the band pulled off the ultimate comeback. The original members reunited. The makeup returned. The shows sold out across the world. They played 92 shows in 75 cities and sold 1.2 million tickets. The tour raked in $143 million. But behind the scenes, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Ace Frehley and Peter Criss were paid flat rates of $80,000 per show, while Gene and Paul Stanley pocketed $110,000 each plus a share of the profits. Lawsuits erupted. Old tensions resurfaced. The reunion was both a massive success and a reminder of the band's fragile chemistry. From 2006 to 2012, Gene Simmons allowed cameras into his home life for a reality show called Gene Simmons Family Jewels. It showed him with longtime partner Shannon Tweed and their two children, Nick and Sophie. The series became A&E's second biggest hit after Dog the Bounty Hunter and lasted 7 seasons. It presented Gene as a family man, softening his image, but carefully avoided most of his wild past. Even so, scandals still surfaced. In 2008, a sex tape leaked showing him with another woman. He sued, claiming it was a violation of privacy. The biggest twist came in 2011, when after 28 years of refusing marriage, Gene finally wed Shannon Tweed. The wedding made headlines everywhere. On the show, Shannon's patience was visibly tested. She once stormed off the Joy Behar show, calling him a pig. On another occasion, she found his secret stash of explicit Polaroids and burned them on air. The therapy sessions shown on their reality series revealed her frustration with his unwillingness to commit. For the first time, Gene admitted that his childhood had left him with deep fears about relationships. In July 2011, he proposed to Shannon in Belize, and they married on October 1. Their children played central roles in the ceremony, making it an emotional moment few thought would ever happen. By the 2000s, Gene's business empire was unstoppable. He licensed the Kiss name to over 5,000 products, from pinball machines to condoms to even coffins. The brand was everywhere, raking in more than $1 billion. But Gene sometimes went too far. In 2017, he tried to trademark the famous devil horns hand gesture, claiming he invented it back in 1974. His application described it as a pose with the index and pinky fingers raised and the thumb extended, essentially the same as the sign language gesture for I love you. The backlash was immediate. Metal fans were furious, reminding him that John Lennon, Ronnie James Dio, and many others had used it long before Kiss. Within days, Gene withdrew the filing, but the controversy showed how far he was willing to go to maintain control over rock culture. Legal troubles also followed him. In 2010, ESPN makeup artist Victoria Jackson accused him of inappropriate behavior during a SportsCenter appearance. She claimed he hugged and humped her while in costume. Gene denied it, saying his metal codpiece made such behavior impossible. He even filed a countersuit, and the case was eventually settled. In 2016, a dishwasher at one of his Rock and Brews restaurants accused him of groping her, followed by a similar claim in 2017. Both cases were quietly resolved. Gene always dismissed such accusations as baseless, but the number of incidents painted a troubling picture. Despite the controversies, his fortune only grew. By 2015, Gene Simmons was worth over $400 million. That wealth didn't just come from music, it came from non-stop touring, more than 100 million album sales, and mountains of merchandise. He co-founded the Rock and Brews restaurant chain with Paul Stanley in 2012, expanding it to multiple locations. In 2017, he released The Vault, a $2,000 limited edition box set of rare recordings. A year later, he became the chief evangelist officer for a cannabis company called Invictus MD. He even co-owned the LA Kiss Arena football team in 2013, though it folded after a few years. By 2025, he was still able to earn 6 figures per show on his solo tours, even without the full Kiss stage spectacle. Gene's personal life had always been complicated. He met Shannon Tweed in 1983 at the Playboy Mansion. Shannon, Playmate of the Year in 1982, entered his life knowing full well about his reputation. Gene often bragged that he had been with nearly 5,000 women. They had 2 children together, Nick in 1989 and Sophie in 1992. Gene liked to joke that marriage was a trap, quoting Groucho Marx, but his behavior pushed Shannon to her limits. The reality show exposed their struggles, and ultimately, their eventual wedding became a defining moment in his personal story. In December 2018, Gene suffered a painful loss when his mother, Flora Klein, passed away at 93. She was a Holocaust survivor who had endured Nazi camps and lost her own mother in a gas chamber. After immigrating to Israel and then to New York, she raised Gene as a single mother. He often said she was his moral compass. Her death shook him deeply, and for once, fans saw Gene stripped of his bravado. Even his children were not immune from controversy. In 2010, his son Nick faced backlash when his comic book Incarnate was accused of plagiarizing the Japanese manga Bleach. Fans posted side-by-side comparisons of panels that looked nearly identical. The publisher pulled the comic, and Nick apologized, claiming it was meant as homage, but his credibility was damaged. In recent years, Gene's outspoken nature has sparked fresh scandals. In 2024, during a guest appearance on Dancing with the Stars, he made comments about female dancers that many found creepy. His remarks went viral, and social media labeled him the gross uncle. He refused to apologize, saying he stood by every word. In 2025, he launched a fan package costing over $12,000, which let fans act as his roadie for a day, receive a signed bass, and be introduced on stage. Critics slammed it as tone-deaf during hard economic times, but it still sold out. That same year, controversy hit again when President Trump announced Kiss would receive the Kennedy Center honors. Fans were stunned because Gene had previously blasted Trump, calling him abhorrent and comparing his rise to cockroaches crawling out of the walls. The sudden silence from Gene after the announcement spoke volumes. By 2025, Gene was still touring solo. At the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, he performed without the usual Kiss armor, sharing stories from his 50-year career. But ticket prices, some as high as $500, caused backlash. Several shows were cancelled due to low sales. Critics accused him of caring more about money than his fans. On July 23, 2025, when Ozzy Osbourne died, Gene broke down in an interview. He remembered how Kiss had once opened for Black Sabbath in 1975 and spoke emotionally about Ozzy's kindness. He revealed that Kiss even turned down a Sabbath tour in the 70s because of the heavy drug use, wanting to protect their band's image.